Welcome to On Deck. We have a very special show today, a 1-hour special edition. We'll get to that later. Now I want to welcome Christine and Annie and kind of say, I want to say to you, Christine, what's new, but Annie has a story with that.
Annie is much more interesting.
My goodness.
Annie, you just got back from a fabulous trip.
Yeah, I did a bike and barge through the Champagne Valley of France from Paris to Epernay. It was about 135 miles, and it was fabulous with a bunch of people from the Upper Cape Ski Club, and we had a great time. And at the end of 2 exhausting weeks, we're at the Charles de Gaulle Airport, and I'm like chit-chatting with some Frenchmen in the elevator, and because I'm the cheerful girl. And then I get to our bus stop, and apparently that cheerful Frenchman sliced my purse strap and took my bag.
Holy.
So just goes to show, ignorant American. Whoopsie, there's married. There's signs all over the airport. Be careful of pickpocketers.
Really?
So it's really kind of this elaborate. They have this business plan. I know the people because it was very funny the way it happened. And even my husband and the people we were traveling with, you get into an elevator, right, and you're looking at the number. You're not paying attention. And you're way down. No, you're way down with all your other luggage and your coats over your arm. And it wasn't until my husband said, Annie, would you check your phone for the location of our hotel? And I went,
And you said no phone.
no phone.
What else was in there?
Everything. So, except for the passports, which were in my back pocket because we had just gotten our boarding passes.
Right.
So, just a little word of caution.
If you're traveling
Pay
anywhere,
attention.
be very careful.
Yeah,
That is
and-
really something. But you had a very good, I was following you on Facebook, you had a very good attitude about it. You didn't let it ruin your trip.
No, because all that stuff is replaceable. And quite frankly, during our trip, a dear family, friends of ours lost their son to opioids, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And I started thinking about the big picture.
Absolutely.
This little hiccup that happened to me is nothing compared to what some people are going through. So you shake it off, right?
Okay.
Although I am in communication hell. So I apologize publicly for not getting back to you because I don't know who you are anymore because nothing comes up on my phone.
We are so dependent.
We
So
are.
dependent.
It's
amazing.
unbelievable.
That's true.
Can you top that?
I can't top that. Today
Good.
is the last day of 2nd grade for my 8-year-old. And,
Yay!
and she pointed out this morning that she's wearing the same dress she wore on the first day of 2nd grade, which we didn't even plan.
Well, that's pretty. That means
Yeah.
she didn't grow.
Oh, she grew.
Oh.
The dress was here, and now the dress is here. But
Now it's very stylish.
so, it's all good.
Before we introduce today's guest, I just want to say that here at MASH PTV on June 29th, we have a fabulous art show that is opening. The opening reception is 6 to 8. It's artists Margaret Nowak, Janet Schwartz, and the Monday Morning Painters. And they're going to have about 20 to 25 pieces here for a couple of months. And it's going to be fantastic. There's a reception from 6 to 8, as I was saying, on June 29th. And spread it around because these paintings are amazing.
Oh, great.
Gorgeous. I may even take art lessons after looking at those.
I love the Monday Morning Painters. That sounds
Isn't
like a
that
fun
neat?
group.
Yeah.
Hey, can I just also say shameless promotion?
Of course.
So the Cotuit Center for the Arts, everybody loves it. They're doing great things, right? But one of the coolest things I think that's coming up is they're doing this Broadway in Cotuit. So Cheetah Rivera is coming.
I have tickets.
Do you really?
I do.
Oh, good for
Yeah.
you. I did not get Cheetah, but I got Megan Hilty and I got Sutton Foster. I got those 2 tickets. So those 2 sets. So I'm just putting it out there because to have these folks who are on stage on Broadway now, so close to us here in Cotuit, is incredible.
It's
So
a living room concert. It's amazing.
Yeah, because it's such an intimate venue there. It's just
And
well
there's
worth it.
meet and greet opportunity as well.
Yeah.
There
so,
is. You can actually talk to them and shake their hands.
Yeah.
and take a photo and do that whole thing. So anyway, so I just wanted to put it out there because I have been out of the country, so I haven't seen any press. But I think it's going to be a fabulous party, wonderful music, and Cotuit really knows how to put on an event. So Broadway on Cape Cod, Cotuit Center for the Arts. Look it up on the website.
Thank you. It's going to be great. as I said, special edition. We have some very interesting guests that we would like to introduce you right after this break. We are back, and I'm so excited, as I said, to have this special edition 1 hour long show. We have some very interesting guests. We have Rabbi Elias Lieberman and Paul Glass. We're going to talk about a big event that's happening on June 24th called Cape Cod Pride. Following that, we have Joan Peters Gilmartin, who is going to talk about the opioid and substance abuse crisis here on the Cape. And my husband said to me, why those two things? They don't seem to go together. And I said, yeah, they go together. They're issues that are happening on Cape Cod everywhere, but it's interesting to look at them on Cape Cod. So Rabbi, you've been the rabbi of the Falmouth Jewish Congregation since 1990.
I have. I came at the age of 12.
You did, okay. He's saying that, but we both realized when we spoke that we were both getting our Medicare cards in the fall, so don't fool me. And you do a lot of work with social justice, which is one of the reasons I joined the congregation, because I found your bio very impressive.
Thank
And you are very involved in this LGBT life at the Cape. Can you tell us what got you involved in that?
Absolutely. I think it really dates from my childhood. My mother, of blessed memory, was involved in lots of different things. One of the jobs she held in Maryland was working for Planned Parenthood, and that involved sex education in high schools. And she came in contact with gay and lesbian people who she invited to our home. Mm-hmm. And so I got the message early on that not only was that fine, but this was something that my parents felt was fine. And so for me, it became sort of a non-issue in terms of acceptance of people with different orientations. And as I grew, it also became clear to me that my own sense of Jewish identity was very bound up with an awareness and sensitivity towards people who are marginalized, who are deemed other. Mm-hmm. That's been a big piece of it. So I brought that into my work as a rabbi when I was ordained in 1984.
At the age of 5.
Right. Right.
And tell us about Cape Cod Pride. And Paul, you jump in
Sure.
whenever you want to tell us some more.
Sure. So obviously the Cape has a long and rich history of its LGBTQ community, much of which has been centered in Provincetown, and that's certainly what the world tends to know. But without question, and Paul can speak to this better than I, there are people who are part of that community across the Cape. So about 2 or 3 years ago, someone moved to Falmouth and joined our congregation who had been living out in Western Massachusetts for many years. And he was actually quite shocked to find that there was no Pride celebration on this part of the Cape. And he said, what's going on? Why not? And he said, let's change that. So we coalesced, a group formed from 2 primary sponsoring organizations, PFLAG of Cape Cod, which is a support group for the LGBTQ community, and No Place for Hate Falmouth, which is an anti-bias group centered on the Upper Cape.
Great group.
So we pulled together, and last year we pulled off our first Cape Cod Pride celebration here in Falmouth, and this is the second year.
That's great. Now, tell us where it takes place and what time.
It's set for Saturday, June 24th. It will run from noon until 3. And it's held at Morse Pond School, on the playground of Morse Pond School, which is 323 Jones Road in Falmouth.
What does the day look like, or the few hours look like? Because you told me there's a great musical performance.
There's an extraordinary performer that we're really thrilled to have, whose name is Zoe Lewis.
Oh.
I'm glad you know her. She's based in Provincetown, but she travels the world. She is English by birth, and she's just a phenomenal, talented musician. Keyboards, guitar, ukulele, and one of the cleverest songwriters I've ever heard. She's a gem.
So entertaining.
She absolutely. So she'll be performing from 1 to 2 that day.
Okay.
Paul, maybe you want to talk about some other things that are going to be happening that day?
Well, I'm really excited about it because last year, Yeah, there were a couple of hundred people that showed up, and that was the first one. And I don't think it was really word wasn't out. Word of mouth didn't spread as quickly or as far reaching as it has over the past months. I think that it's going to be an extraordinary event. We have so many other things that are going on. I'm just kind of making some comparison between last year and what we have planned for this year. Last year, it was at the same location in Morse Pond School, but it was in the open field. We had a few vendors and some tabling that was going on, and people. The idea of it was that participants would come and use it as a picnic setting, and that was kind of how it was built. This year, however,
Raising the bar.
we have kicked it up a notch.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to have, the field is going to be tented. We have the extraordinary Zoe Lewis, who is going to be featured as our main entertainer. We're going to have music. We're going to have games and activities and raffles and bunches of things that are going on. We have now probably 30 vendors that are going to be participating and tabling and having their wares and different things to see, touch, feel, buy, those kinds of things. We have great food vendors that are going to be there for the eats, and it's just going to be an extraordinary
That's gonna be
event.
great.
So we're really looking forward to it. I think, and we're actually preparing for about 1,000 people.
So is there a ticket price for this, or is it free?
It's free of charge.
Absolutely free. As a matter of
Free of
fact,
charge.
everyone
Terrific.
who passes through the Rainbow Balloon Arch will receive a free raffle ticket. In part, that's a way to help us figure out how many people actually attended. But there are
Sure.
wonderful raffle items.
Great.
We've had tremendous sponsorship. Rockland Bank Trust, Cape Cod 5,
Eastern Bank.
Cape Cod Healthcare, the Gale
The law
Fund.
offices of Sue Wilson.
Right.
And,
Woods Hole
major
Foundation.
contributors.
Wonderful support.
Once you start saying the support, then you think, what if I forgot somebody?
Absolutely.
What am I going to do? That's terrible. You know?
We're grateful for all of
So
it.
anyone that was forgotten,
There are lots of
you
them.
thank them, right?
Is
But
there a website?
Yeah, and
There is
is
the
there
website is CapeCodPride.org.
Okay.
And it lists all of the many of the activities. It has pictures and everything of where the event is going to be. It lists the time from noon to 3. It identifies participants, our major sponsors as well. So there's a lot of information on the website, and we're really pleased that we were able to get it off the ground a few months ago.
We also have a Facebook page, which is Cape Cod Pride Celebration 2017.
Great. And can you still give?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are links on both places for contributions.
Okay.
And at the day of the event, we will still accept donations from cash donations or by check.
Paul, do you want to say something about where donated funds and the raffle funds are going to be directed this year?
The raffle funds, we have a lot of contributors who have, or sponsors, if you will, who have donated things for the raffle. We probably have, about 20, 30 gifts that
I think approaching 40.
involved. And it includes everything from T-shirts to dinner. So it's a wide variety of raffle items, and we're excited that that's going to be part of it. We are looking at incorporating a lot of different things as part of the celebration event. We only have 3 hours. However, it's going to be jam-packed, and we want to get a lot of things in.
yeah,
I do want to point out that all of the money that gets raised through the raffle and anything that comes into the donation jar is going to be directed to an organization called Freedom Massachusetts. This is an organization which is working hard to fight the repeal of the equal rights which were extended to transgender people in Massachusetts by a vote a year or so ago. On the ballot in 2018, unfortunately, there will be an attempt to repeal those rights, and so Freedom Massachusetts is working hard to see that that doesn't happen. So we're happy to direct those funds towards that important
that's wonderful.
work.
That's wonderful. Now that we've done all these plugs for Cape Cod Pride, I would like to hear about what you are spending a lot of your time doing, because it seems very important to me and kind of a niche that we don't usually hear about.
Well, it is a bit of a niche, and what I'm the co-chair for LGBT Elders of Color. It is an outreach initiative to kind of bring older adults of color out of isolation, which many of us tend to kind of self-isolate just due to our age and the loss of friends, particularly around the HIV epidemic. You know, excuse me, that we've lost lots of friends, but there's also we've folks have kind of self-isolated and had the circle of friends has shrunk. But this was we provide social engagement as part of opportunities for folks to kind of come, re-engage with the community, meet some new people, and it doesn't matter whether they're single, married, have partners, what have you. It's an opportunity for folks to kind of come together and realize, you know, there's still life out there, even as retirees. You know, there are lots of things that we can do as retirees. And my favorite phrase is, "Look, folks, we're not dead yet." Okay?
Right.
And it's primarily out of the Boston area, which we tend to have a great following. It's been going now for about 3 years. We've had. It started out with our first event at the Central Boston Elder Services building in Dudley Square, and the first event we planned for about 25 or 30 people, and almost 100 people showed up.
Wow.
So it was something
Answering
that
a
folks
need.
that we're saying often that it was really something that has been needed for a long time, and they were glad to have it. I mean, since then, we've had about 16 events.
In Boston.
Out of the Boston area.
Okay, so what's happening here at the Cape
But
for
here on the Cape,
elder-
we have lots of different outlets, and surprisingly, folks don't necessarily know a lot about it.
Tell us.
One of the groups that I'm connected with and a member of is the Falmouth Gay Men's Social Group.
Nice.
And that is a group of guys. It started out close to almost 10 years ago now, but we used to meet at the Canty Center in Falmouth,
right.
and you know, since that time, you know, the opportunities were not free anymore, so we had to be a little more creative. And what they came up with was that we would meet on a weekly basis every Thursday evening. We meet at different restaurants around the Boston, the Falmouth and Mashpee, surrounding towns. You know, wherever we find that there's a welcoming environment, which is safe, and folks who can come out and interact and be socialized, basically. And it's not just for older adults; it's intergenerational.
Oh, okay.
So
great.
we have there's a core membership of about 40 guys, and at any given week at dinner, there's at least 15 to 20 guys. So
Wow, that's terrific.
there's an opportunity for folks to come, and they come from all parts of the Cape. It's not just out of the Falmouth or Mashpee. Folks have come as far as from Orleans.
Oh, is that right? Wonderful.
To, just, you know, they've heard about it. They and either through word of mouth or the website, and the website is FalmouthGayMen'sGroup.org. FalmouthMen'sGroup.org. It is the Falmouth Gay Men's Social Group, but the website is FalmouthMen'sGroup.org.
I just
And-
thought of something. Well, is there one of these for women?
We haven't gotten that far yet. But women are welcome. We don't, we have,
One. No, none.
well, not as many women would be interested
Right,
necessarily because it is predominantly gay men. However, there are lots of other opportunities where lesbians and women can come together and be social as well. There are other things that are going on in the Cape, particularly through the senior centers.
Okay.
Again, it's for older adults primarily, but it's also intergenerational as well. The Orleans Senior Center is with Marianne Ryan, who has working very hard and has brought about an opportunity for older adults to come together once a month, the fourth Friday of every month, and they host a different. It's basically a supper club, and people come to have dinner. They engage, they interact. And you know, sometimes there are activities going on. They come in and talk about different topics and have things that are on their minds, and particularly and find out about some resources that are available to them that they may not have known about.
Paul, would you talk about Sage Table? Because I just learned about that recently, and I thought it
The
was fascinating.
Sage Table was something that was created by Sage.org, and that's their website. But Sage is an organization that is a champion for social issues and things around older adults. And what they created for this year was a Sage Table. It was a national effort endeavor that went out and was blasted all over the place. And it turned out to be a fantastic engagement. And it really was to bring together young and older adults who can finally begin to interact and have some social discussions. Discussions about lifestyles, about everything from politics to lifestyles to resources. Opportunity for them to have a cross-generational discussions, and they use that as they called it the Sage Table, but it really was just an opportunity for folks, as older people tend to say, but opportunity to break bread together. And it was fantastically.
So that happens in person or online?
It was it was meant to engage folks to have encourage people to have invite people to their homes or to a more public environment, a social environment. And it worked out well. People were engaged. There were pictures all over the place that from coast to coast, and it wasn't just here in the Northeast. It was coast to coast.
I'm going to Google that.
Yeah, me too.
That sounds great.
So it's now going to become an annual event. That they wanted to have this Sage Table so that it, you would think that particularly in the LGBT community that folks are very tight knit, but not necessarily so. Oftentimes you find, particularly from the generations, I think this is kind of a universal, that generations don't always talk to one another, and usually there's a little contention or tenseness sometimes when we find that we're in the company of younger folks, and I'm speaking for myself as a senior citizen.
That's over 50. It's over 50. It's no big deal.
I'm well over 50. I am happy to say that I am 68 years old and I'm still going strong. So,
That's great.
68's the new
So
37.
I've had my Medicare card for a few years already.
You can help me. You can help us figure that
So
out.
Paul, I'm a justice of the peace, so I have the pleasure of marrying folks. And I was stunned a couple of years ago. These women from Orleans called and asked if I would marry them, and of course they were referred to me by their financial planner. Actually, it made sense. They're both in their 70s because one or the other, and they weren't sure about their heirs, that kind of thing. So I went and met with them, of course. I won't tell you too much about them, but lovely, lovely women. Been together, considered themselves a Boston marriage still, because they'd been together 45 years. So they had endured the progress of coming out and all of that, and being accepted and being able. However, one of them, who was still actively working, still was unable to tell her boss because it wasn't okay, and he was a vocal homophobe. So she was unable to tell. And the other one, who was in her 70s, 76, none of her siblings would attend the wedding. Still.
Wow.
So, for someone like myself and Christine, we work in theater. So we're around it all the time. We have loved gay people for all of our lives. The sexuality has never been an issue. But to hear that from these two beautiful women, that it still goes on, was just, heartbreaking.
Even within families, it's just
it was just heartbreaking that they couldn't have their families there to share in it, that there was no sharing in it, that they still didn't want to believe these two elderly women had this relationship. It was the most beautiful wedding, and I just felt like, gosh, we've come so far and yet not far enough.
At the opposite end, as we see at the theater, we see so many young people comfortable in their identity.
Yeah.
And their identity, is increasingly diverse and brave and unquestioned and welcomed. It's to see
Thank God.
to see a young person audition for a show and for us to say, is that a boy or a girl? We're not sure, but they're 14. It doesn't matter. The fact that it's something is shifted, especially for young people, and I see that on the Cape a lot. At least in the theater
I think we've
environment.
become more welcoming.
Well,
We
I think it's
haven't.
also some of it has to do with generational.
Right,
you
a
know.
paradigm shift in
Yeah,
generations.
it's
It takes a
shifted.
generation for
And
things to.
the younger generation has normalized it
Oh, yeah.
enough where it has allowed us to progress a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you, bias and stigma still exists, but particularly on the Cape. But we find it more prevalent in more rural areas than you find in more urban areas. Out of the, it's an uphill battle in most areas, but and particularly in the areas that tend to be a little more rural, and I'm referring more to the Cape, because the Cape, quite as kept, is still fairly rural.
Right.
As we were talking about earlier, there are
Yes,
still people
exactly.
who've lived their entire life here and don't travel over
Yeah,
the bridge very often.
we talked earlier about, what is it with the Cape people? They just don't want to cross the bridge. I don't
Right.
get it. It's
I'm
almost
doing
like
it
they-
today.
Yeah, it's almost like they feel like they're traveling to a different state.
A different country.
Right.
And every year that Pride Month rolls around is always an opportunity to reflect how far we've come as a society,
Yes.
how far we still have to go. I was struck by what Christine said about how young people, by and large, are more accepting of their peers and their gender identity, their sexual orientation. And yet we know that there's still so many challenges, especially for young people, and especially for trans young people.
Well, that's what did you read the Boston Globe yesterday?
I did,
Yes.
a powerful story about
That
this
was a powerful
school
story
principal.
about a school principal at the Heath School in Brookline who is transitioning from a woman to a man and has just let his school community know about that. So in that way, we have to say we've come a long, long way for that to be able to happen. I thought it was amazing.
That would have been professional suicide,
Yeah.
20 years ago.
It was professional suicide if you got pregnant 40 years ago when you were teaching.
My 8-year-old is in a singing group, and there's an older student in the group, and we were talking about him in the car, and she said, "No, Mom, they prefer they/them pronouns," and that was, and that wasn't even a huge discussion. It was like, oh, they/them, like for her.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So we have a long way to go, and we've come a long
We've come a
way.
long way.
And we have to take a commercial break, but really interesting things to hear. And I'm going to be June 24th, Saturday at Cape Cod Pride, and I hope anyone who's watching will stop in. We're back, and I'm very pleased to introduce Joan Peters Gilmartin. She lost her son Corey to an opioid overdose 2 years ago, is a physician's assistant, so you know a lot about that kind of thing to begin with. And you have become very involved. Obviously, you did not want Corey's death to be in vain. And the more I read about you, the more impressed I am at the work that you do. Excuse me if I'm getting a little choked up. Joan gave me this book to read by a very good friend of hers, Anita Devlin, and Anita's son. Both wrote the book together. It's called Sober, which stands for...
Son of a bitch, everything is real.
And it really, Anita grew up here on the Cape,
Raised her family.
as did you, and it was just such a powerful story to me that. And then when I think her son is doing well, in fact, you told me he just got married. So when I think of what you've gone through and the fact that you're doing all the work that you are, I want to say thank you, and I know we all would feel that way. So how about you introduce us to Corey and tell us your story,
Okay.
and tell us whatever you want.
Well, it is my Corey story, and just to preface that, my Corey travels around with me in the work that I do, not only at the local level here on the Cape, but we travel to the State House where we rally in front of the State House and we talk to our leaders there, or I should say the people who work for us, who represent us, and then also to Washington when we go to speak to our senators and legislators there, and to Atlanta to talk to the people at the CDC, and to national meetings on substance use disorder and mental health. So this is my Corey, and he passed just before his 32nd birthday and was probably one of the first fentanyl deaths in southeastern Massachusetts. Fentanyl showed up in southeastern Massachusetts in January of 2014, mid-January, in the city of Taunton. And a week later, my son, who had been 8 months clean, relapsed and probably didn't even know that it was fentanyl that he had, and he died. This was after a 13-year battle of substance use disorder, which started in high school. And having worked in family medicine for 30 years, I was certainly very much aware of how difficult it was to access services, to find services, to get services paid for. As I advocated not only for my son, but other young people that were coming in, and the struggles families go through. And in my work since this loss, I've learned that we all think, particularly in the medical community, that we know everything we need to know, and what I really discovered is we knew very little. Our training encompassed very little in addiction medicine, pain management. What we knew about opioids really came from pharmaceutical companies and through the 1980s, which, as we later learned, was misleading. And a lot of our policies were driven by bodies that were misinformed, and that includes everything from Big Pharma to the Food and Drug Administration and our own medical societies that were directing us on how to manage people's pain. So what started with a prescription pill problem set us up primarily for the opioid epidemic that we are experiencing now. And if anybody doubts that this is an epidemic, all you have to do is look at the data, look at the numbers. So through my own self-education process, I have, and my own grieving process, came into contact with many families who are dealing with the same loss, and that has been my biggest source of comfort and relief, and the force that's driving a lot of the policy changes. So I'm just one of many parents, and I will say particularly moms, because I think dads have a harder time coming out and talking about their feelings. And whenever I see dads at the group meetings, I always want to hug them, like, good for you for coming out. My husband does come out, and he's a very shy, introverted person, but this is actually, I've seen so much growth in his own personal development and ability to speak about this as his form of healing. So we come together and we help heal each other in support groups. There's now a very big movement with grandparents who are raising grandchildren because their own child has either died or is incarcerated or in long-term treatment. And so we have grandparents raising grandchildren who never expected to be, or probably weren't even financially set up to do that. So there are many warriors out there on the front working for policy change, and I think that's really important. And just to sort of talk about what you were talking about, part of our work has really been about removing stigma and shame, because until we can do that, we can't come together as communities to, deal with this problem and think about how we're going to change and open up the space for people to come and get help. And to provide the resources that are so desperately needed, because there really isn't a family in America that isn't being touched by addiction or substance use disorder these days. If they say they aren't, there's a lot of denial there somewhere.
Joan, can I speak to that
Yeah.
as a clergy person? Serving a middle-class Jewish congregation, and of course, assuming naively that these issues don't touch my community. So just within the past 5 years, became aware of 3 young people who grew up in my congregation, each of whom has dealt with addiction to opioids, heroin in one case. Happily, they are doing well as far as I know, but it was a shock to me and an important kick in the butt to learn more, to realize that no one escapes this.
There is
Everyone is
no
touched by it.
demographic that is unscathed across the country and certainly across our own little island community. You know, sometimes you think of Cape Cod as sort of an isolated island community. And our losses, if you look at the, Massachusetts Department of Public Health data, recently released, the most recent quarterly report at the end of February of 2017 already indicates that the numbers have continued to go up each year. Last year we were just under 1,800. Now we're already over 2,000 in the first quarter. So we know that the numbers are going to continue to go up. We are going to have to take this on as a community struggle, a state struggle, just like the climate change issue. When we have a federal government that is so mired in politics that we can't make forward progress in getting the funding to back up policies and laws that have been enacted, like the Mental Health Care Parity Act of 2008, that didn't even have regulations in place till 2012, and there's still no enforcement or funding. So until we can't sit around waiting for the federal government to step in and help us. We as communities are going to have to take care of our own. We're going to have to educate the public. We're going to have to provide community resources. And my main mission is to go out into the community and provide public education, not only in schools, but particularly to parents. When you understand that the average age of first use of any intoxicant is aged 12, to wait until high school to start talking to high school, I'm sorry, the horse is out of the barn.
Way out of the barn.
Way out of the barn. We need to be engaging with parents of middle school children at a much earlier age and tell them how important it is to be free about sharing information about family history, which is something nobody ever talks about.
Right.
That child needs to know what their risk is. And unless a family can talk about, well, granddad was a closet drinker,
Right.
Or, grandma suffered from real depression, or there's bipolar in the family. Until you can have an honest discussion about that and let a child know what their risk could be.
Right. Self-medicating.
Self-medication for things happens in our families right here on the Cape as well as across the country.
So much of it is about the language too. So drug addiction versus
Substance use disorder.
Substance use disorder. Grandpa was an alkie. I mean,
Junkie, the term
the
junkie.
names that I hear my mother's generation use, and the feeling toward substance use disorder it's almost insurmountable to me. Like I don't know how to sway them. I don't know how to educate. I mean, and they're often they're most of the people who are voting.
Yes.
They're most of the people with the money who can fund this cause. How can we break through?
Well, one of the things that was really sort of a slap wake-up call for me was, as I was going out and doing programming, very often I was discouraged that the audience was not the young family members and parents that we needed to message to. And I'll never forget a program that was held at a church down in Orleans, and it was showing the HBO film Heroin Cape Cod movie, which is sort of an in-your-face, shock and awe kind of movie. And so I walk into the church and I'm thinking, okay, church is another opportunity to engage families, and the church hall is full of older people. And so I was sort of like, where are these young families? And so the lights go down, they're watching this very gritty show, and me as the medical person in the room, I'm thinking, oh boy, somebody's going to be an AFib in here, I'm going to have to perform CPR. Because I could hear the people in the dark sniffling and clutching their chest and gasping, because it's a hard, gritty film to watch. And when the lights came back up, I saw how affected they were. And I thought to myself, you know what, there is a message for everybody to get. Because these people may not be raising children now, or they may be raising their grandchildren. They may have friends that are raising grandchildren and don't quite understand why are they doing that. Why don't they just tough love it and let their kids grow up on their own? They don't understand the struggles their peers are going through trying to raise grandchildren. And more importantly, they're voters. They need to be educated so they will vote for the policy changes that we need to get the resources that we need in our communities. So there really is a message to get to every age group.
So one of the things that struck me, our 23-year-old came home for Christmas a year ago, and one of the gifts I wanted to give her was to connect her with some of her friends from grammar school. And I was stunned to learn that 8 of her classmates had died from overdose. 23.
Well, that reminds me of, I'm sure one of the people in your community that you were talking about is a person that I met. And he was speaking one night in Barnstable, and I went to hear him speak. And he was saying how excited he was. Here he was, 22 years old at the time, and he's telling the audience how excited he was that he was going to his first wedding. He had bought a suit, and he was really proud he was going to his first wedding. He goes, you know, I've already buried 10 of my friends. He goes, and this is my first wedding. And I put myself back in time here. I've been married 40 years. But, you know, back in the 70s, at that age, I was just going to weddings. I never
Never even
went
thought
to a
about
funeral.
that. Right.
And this is the new reality that young people are dealing with. It's the impact of this across our communities is huge. The impact in our schools is huge. What are we going to provide for resources in our schools when you've got children being raised by grandparents and they haven't seen their own parents? Where do you provide resources? And one of the things I've become engaged in with another family from the East Dam area who also lost a son, and that's a horrible story in that that's somebody who fell through the insurance crack. The young man of this family turned 26 years old. He fell off his family's health insurance, hadn't yet gotten covered by Mass Health because he was a seasonal construction worker, and at the time he needed help, he couldn't get it because he had no insurance. And 3 days after his overdose death, his Mass Health came in. That should not happen in this nation, that people are put at risk like that. There should be care for people available when they need it. There's a very narrow door time frame. When somebody needs help, when they're asking for help, they're begging for help, that's when they need to be able to get into some place, not to, be exited out of the emergency room with pages of paper, go call these 30 places
Figure
and
it out
see
by yourself.
where you can
It's
get
the
in
last
yourself.
thing they could do.
Because
Yeah.
the first thing that's going to happen is, what kind of insurance do you have? And oops, sorry, we don't have any beds. And that's a horrible place to be. And I've been through that. I have, as a medical person, I know how the system works, and I know that the person generally on the other end of the phone is someone who's trained to say no immediately. And you have to talk your way up the food chain till you get to a medical director, or have a peer-to-peer review with me as a medical person with another medical person on the end of the phone. And I had to do that with my son. I remember Memorial Day weekend when my son was being discharged out of detox and needed to go to rehab, where the first answer was no. And I spent 2 hours on a phone till I talked my way up the food chain, got the medical director for the Blue Cross Blue Shield, and said, this is the story. If you refuse him, I need your name and address. And she asked me why. I said, because I want to know where to send the lawsuits to when my son dies. And all of a sudden, there was access.
Attention.
One shouldn't have to fight that hard to get care.
And most mothers could not.
And
Don't
and
have
most
that.
people in the midst of their deepest,
that
darkest moment do
articulation,
not
that
have the ability
determination.
to fight for that. They need people to advocate for them. And so this family down in Orleans started a group a nonprofit organization. It's called the Open Doorway of Cape Cod. It really is the only organization down that end of the Cape that was doing recovery navigation work for people. Free of charge, people could call and we do the work. We would be the ones on the phone calling those 30 places for you to get you into some place. We would find places that offer scholarships to get people into treatment. The Open Doorway of Cape Cod.org
We'll put it up on
it's
the
a
screen.
nonprofit. We charge nothing. It's all volunteer. Nobody gets paid. And we raise money through requesting donations. We sell t-shirts and gear on our website. And we're now moving towards, because our need has just exploded. I mean, we thought we'd be lucky in the first year to help maybe 10 people. In the first year it was 55 people. The second year was 150 people. And now it's over 200 people in just the 2.5 years. So the need has grown enormously, but we don't have the funding to always provide the services that we need, which could be, providing somebody with their first 2 weeks of sober house money. You have to pay rent to move into sober house, and you have 2 weeks to find employment. So sometimes people need the money for their sober house. Sometimes people need money to fly them to get to detox facility, and their families are already tapped out because, let's face it, we're treating disease in its very late stage instead of early intervention, which means people have had multiple trips through that revolving door of short-term treatment. And so families very often are tapped out. I've met families in my groups who have second and third mortgaged their homes to pay $30,000, $40,000 for each time their child has been into a short-term treatment. So there's funding needed to get people to places. We have had people come out that don't have housing yet. Housing's always an issue on Cape Cod for young people, and so we might have to give them rent money to be in a hotel or to help them work with housing assistance to find housing for themselves, safe, sober, clean housing for themselves. So that stuff doesn't come free, and we're constantly looking for donations, and I'm trying to put together a program here on the Cape that I met a woman down in Atlanta who started a program called Realty for Rehab. She lost her son 4 months ago. She's one of the top real estate brokers in Atlanta. And what she did is she has a rotating cycle of people who take a portion of their real estate commissions and make a donation to the nonprofit to provide these kind of services. So I'd like to establish this on the Cape to hopefully be one of the beneficiaries to continue the work that we do. So that's some of the work that we do. But my main focus is on education and particularly helping families understand.
That's what I want to ask you about, because the political piece of this is difficult and long, and we know that. But just to go back to the beginning, what are some of the early signs parents, grandparents can look for? After I finished the book, I called my daughter and was talking to her. She said, "Mom, they're 4 and 6." I said, "I know, but I just want you to be aware of some of these things."
It's never too early to educate yourself, that's for sure. But there are very clear signs, and a lot of people say, okay, well, adolescence is that time when kids are going to try everything, and that's absolutely true. That's part of human nature and adolescent brain development, is that adolescence is the time when the final process of brain development is going to be completed from the time they enter adolescence till about their young 20s. By 23, brain development is pretty much complete. So during adolescence, the brain is laying down tract work to make super circuits between the lower parts of the brain that are involved in survival, reward, pleasure, and the frontal cortex, which is the last area of the brain to develop through later adolescence into early adulthood. And that is where your higher functioning CEO thought processes happen. Judgment, decision making, and should overpower the more primitive lower brain reward pleasure systems over time, so that people make, as they mature, more intelligent decisions. What happens if people start experimenting and fall into regular substance use, they develop a pathological relationship to intoxication. And therefore, it makes no difference what the drug is. And a lot of us have to be educated to understand we have inherited this drug bias that we think one drug is safer or better or less evil than
Right.
another.
Right.
And that's a dangerous thought process because to the developing brain, it makes no difference. There's probably about a 5% difference in terms of physiology of how these intoxicants work in our bodies. But in terms of what happens in our brain, 95% it's the same. If I sat here and told you that, okay, let's talk about the child that you see who was doing well until they hit adolescence, then all of a sudden they're hiding in their room, they don't join in family activities, all of a sudden they're living kind of a messy, disarrayed life, just looking at their room. Their grades are failing when formerly they were doing well. The sports that they formerly enjoyed or social activities they've fallen away from. They've chosen a different peer group that doesn't seem to be doing well. They're getting in trouble with the law. There's money missing out of the house. There's automobile accidents, not one, but 2 or 3. Those are the kinds of things that should start to make people think about what's going on here. And it's easy to say that, oh, I'd rather my kids having a beer or smoking a joint than shooting heroin. But it makes no difference if that experimentation period has now moved into misuse, into chronic use, into a full-blown substance use disorder. And by being stuck in that stage of denial, you miss an opportunity for early intervention. Because as the brain is developing, whatever you're doing in that reward-pleasure system, that's what's going to be myelinated, pruned, and used as the fast track to the frontal
Right.
cortex.
Stay
So
in
you're
there.
saying that a young brain will become hardwired
Yes,
for
exactly,
that dependence.
exactly.
And
And
then-
that's why
there's nothing you can do. I mean,
that's
once
why
it's
you
done,
see,
you're-
that's why early intervention is so important, because if you capture and treat early, your risk if you start abusing and misusing drugs younger than age 23, you have a 1 in 4 risk of developing a substance use disorder. If you wait until you are 23 to 25, the risk drops to 1 in 25. That's the difference because of the hardwiring that happens in the brain. And therefore, it makes no difference
all
what
of
the
it.
substance is. That's our own internal bias about, well, I don't mind if he's drinking or smoking pot, but I sure don't want him shooting up heroin. It makes no difference to the developing brain because it's actually a pathological attachment to intoxication, no matter what the intoxicant is.
Well, Joan, let me ask you a question. As you know, the substance abuse is prevalent in all communities, including the LGBT community.
Yes.
And by the time it gets to the LGBT community, for the most part, the conversations become a lot harder.
Yes.
Early intervention has its place, and it's certainly very important. But how do you start a conversation for intervention with an adult, and trying to with a good friend or a relative? How do you engage in that or begin that kind of conversation, particularly when you know that there's a lot of resistance?
Well, part of that is exactly what you were talking about in terms of language. And now having a clear understanding that this really is a disease process and it becomes a chronic disease. And if we use that framework, it's easier to start that conversation saying, if you had heart disease or diabetes or hypertension, would you not treat that disease, knowing that the end result of a chronic progressive disease is death? All right? No matter what the disease state is. It's the same thing with substance use disorder. It's a brain disease. If you intervene early, your chances for recovery are greater for any chronic disease if you intervene and treat early, rather than waiting till people are in end-stage disease. The problem with our healthcare system is the way it's set up is for late-stage disease and intervention, which means you're gonna spend way more much money trying to get to goal. People are going to die in greater numbers. Right? Relapses are very common, and that's another thing we have to train families to understand. Relapse is common, just like any chronic disease, right?
Yes.
So I think that's a framework to be able to have discussion across the lifespan, that at any point in the lifespan you could develop a chronic disease. The earlier you intervene, the better the likelihood of the outcome.
But the shame and guilt around.
Well, it's much shame and guilt around substance abuse as it is around HIV. It's quite prevalent, particularly here on the Cape. But it's one of the it's almost like a dark secret.
Yes.
Nobody wants to talk about it. There isn't much conversation. Folks are uncomfortable when they engage with somebody who is infected or trying to work with prevention or care. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I know that more needs to be done.
Absolutely, and it is about open conversation and understanding that there is a nature versus nurture process going on in the background, and people often ask that question, which is more. I say it's both, and they're equal. People have family structures where there is probably disease state that isn't understood or talked about. Or even recognized, where people have anxiety, depression, there's trauma. 90% of people with substance use disorder have some kind of trauma in the background that has either not been disclosed or revealed. And through therapeutic intervention, it's often, the layers are peeled back and you sort of see where that trauma might be. It might be over some sexual trauma. It might be over abandonment, negligence, mental health issues in the family. If you've got the dad that walks in every day and he's miserable and he kicks the dog on his way in, throws himself in his chair, doesn't talk to anybody, and bangs down a beer when he comes in, what kind of modeling of behavior do you see? Well, maybe the family does understand that dad really does have some sort of mental health disorder that he's self-medicating for. So a lot of that goes on in a background, and if you look at how that carries through family, what kinds of coping skills are children learning? And I think another very big thing going on in this younger generation is social media. The dangers of social media, where who you are and your worth is defined by what this device is telling you. And there's also new literature and studies showing that this device itself is creating a brain pattern, a myelinated brain pattern ingrainment of our worth.
That's becoming an addiction in itself.
And so I spend a lot of time talking to families when I'm doing, well checks for children and adolescents and even college-age students about how much time are you spending here versus learning the social skills of communication, reading body language, problem solving. And that families really, when you've ever gone to a family occasion and everybody in the room's sitting on this device and nobody's having a face-to-face
We
conversation.
need to radically change
Yeah.
the way we are behaving.
Yes.
We need to radically change the conversation. We need to radically change the language for all of what we're talking about.
So there's both, there's your own personal sphere of things that can be, risk factors, your own mental health, your own ability, coping skills. I mean, part of adolescent development, per Erickson is, that later state of adolescence is to find your place of mastery and also adequacy. Where do I fit in and how do I fit in? And so those things get stunted. Those developmental milestones get stunted if you start using substances very early to deal with your affect or your emotions or your feelings. And that's where you see the stunted development. You can see a 30 or 40-year-old man who has been suffering with long-term substance use, or woman, and they're chronologically a 30 or 40-year-old, but socially, emotionally, they're a 13 or 16-year-old or whatever age they were when they started using. And so that's the problem of later and chronic late disease intervention, is that we've set people up to fail, and then we punish them for failing. You know, we consider them bad or failed people if they can't make it, when it's a system that really needs to change to meet them where they're at and get what they need.
There's a lot of conversation about this, and you know, I'm getting one of these from our cameramen, like to wind it up. So we're going to do another show
That would be
sometime.
excellent.
I'd
Yes.
love to have everybody back. I'd love to have Anita, the author of Sober, here. I want to thank all of you so much. Have to point out Rabbi's tie, of course, today. And Paul, thank you very much for coming. And
Thank you
Joan, it
for
was
having
a
us.
pleasure meeting
Thank
you.
you.
It was a
Great work.
pleasure getting to know your son. And what can I say? We'll do a better job of communicating with everybody, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.